Before we begin, if you're enjoying these stories from law enforcement, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And I'm always curious where you're watching from, so drop your location in the comments below. Now, let's get into tonight's story. My name is Anna Carlson, and for over 12 years I was the sheriff of Lake of the Woods County in northern Minnesota. The incident I'm about to recount took place in the autumn of 1994, and I have never told anyone about it until now. Some events are too strange to share, too unbelievable to put in an official report. But this story must be told, even if no one in the world believes me. Odette, Minnesota, is a town located in the northernmost part of the 48 states. In a good season, the town has a population of 3,000, and most of its residents make a living from logging, fishing, and tourists visiting the boundary waters. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, you can leave your doors unlocked, and the biggest crime we encounter is usually drunk uncles making noise at the VFW on Saturday nights. I'd been sheriff for 6 years in 1994, the first woman to hold the position in the county. It hadn't been easy earning the respect of the old-timers, but by then most folks had accepted that I could do the job. My department was small, just me, 2 deputies, and a dispatcher named Ruth who'd been answering the phone since before I was born. Ruth was in her late 60s, a widow who treated the station like her second home. She knew every family in the county, remembered every birthday, and could calm down even the most hysterical caller with her steady, grandmotherly voice. She was also the only one who knew how to operate our ancient 911 recording system. That system was a relic from the early 80s, a massive, tape-based setup that took up an entire closet in the back of the station. Every emergency call that came in was automatically recorded onto large reel-to-reel tapes. We were supposed to archive them, but honestly, most of the time we just reused the tapes once they were full. Budget was tight, and nobody thought we'd ever need to reference a call from 5 years ago about Mrs. Henderson's missing cat. In September of 1994, the county finally approved funding for a new digital system. Modern, efficient, and about a quarter of the size of our old dinosaur. The installation was scheduled for October, which meant Ruth and I spent most of September sorting through boxes of old tapes, deciding what to keep and what to toss. It was tedious work. Ruth would play snippets of calls, we'd note the date and basic content, and I'd decide if it was worth keeping. Most weren't. Noise complaints, animal control, medical calls that had been resolved years ago. Box after box of the mundane rhythm of small-town life. We were about halfway through when Ruth pulled out a tape from 1989. She threaded it onto the machine and hit play. Static at first, then the familiar beep that marked the start of a recorded call. Ruth's voice, 5 years younger but unmistakable. 911, what's your emergency? Then a woman's voice, panicked, breathless. Please, you have to send someone. He's in the house. He has a gun. Please hurry. Ma'am, what's your address? 352 Lakeshore Drive. Please, he's coming up the stairs. Oh God, please hurry. Ruth's face had gone pale. She looked at me. I don't remember this call. I frowned. It's from 1989. Hard to remember everyone. No, you don't understand. I remember all the serious ones. A home invasion with a gun. I would remember that. I checked the logbook from 1989. Nothing. No entry for a call to 352 Lakeshore Drive. No home invasion. No shooting. No follow-up report. Maybe it was a prank call, I suggested. Ruth shook her head slowly. Listen. She rewound the tape and played it again. This time, I listened more carefully. The woman's terror was real. You can't fake that kind of fear. But there was something else, something in the background of the call. A sound I couldn't quite place. Play it one more time, I said. Ruth obliged. As the woman screamed for help, I heard it clearly this time. In the background, barely audible beneath her panic, was the sound of a television. And the television was broadcasting something specific. A news report. I could just make out the words, "The tragedy in Oklahoma City has left the nation in shock." My blood ran cold. "Ruth, when was the Oklahoma City bombing?" Her hands were shaking as she reached for the calendar on the wall. April 1995. This tape is labeled September 1989. We stared at each other, the impossibility of what we'd just heard settling over us like a weight. "That's not possible," Ruth whispered. "The bombing hasn't happened yet." I grabbed the tape box, checking the label again. Clear as day. September 14th to 20th, 1989, 5 years ago. 6 months before the Oklahoma City bombing would devastate a federal building and become one of the worst domestic terror attacks in American history. Could someone have mislabeled the tape? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ruth shook her head. "I label every tape myself. And look," she pointed to the tape machine's date stamp function. Each recording was automatically marked with the date and time. The call showed September 18th, 1989, 2:47 a.m. "This isn't possible," I said, but even as I spoke, I was thinking about the woman's voice, the terror in her scream, the news broadcast in the background. Should we call this number? 352 Lakeshore Drive? I checked the county records. The address existed, a house on the lake owned by a family named the Johnsons. I knew them vaguely, a retired couple who spent their winters in Arizona. I picked up the phone and dialed. No answer, not unusual for early afternoon on a weekday. "I'm going out there," I said, grabbing my jacket and keys. "Anna, wait. Maybe we should what? Ignore it? Ruth, if there's even a chance something's going to happen at that house, I need to check it out." The drive to Lakeshore Drive took 15 minutes. The Johnson house was a modest 2-story with a long driveway and a view of the lake. Mr. Johnson's truck was in the driveway, but the house looked quiet. I knocked on the door. Mr. Johnson answered, looking surprised to see me. "Sheriff Carlson, is everything all right?" "Just doing a welfare check, Mr. Johnson." "Everything okay here?" Fine. Is there a problem?" I glanced past him into the house. Everything looked normal, clean, quiet. No signs of disturbance. "No problem. Just following up on something. Have you had any issues lately? Any threats? Any concerns about safety?" He looked genuinely puzzled. "No, nothing like that. We're heading to Arizona next month like always. Why do you ask?" "Just routine. Thanks for your time." I drove back to the station, confused and unsettled. The call was clearly impossible, but I'd heard it with my own ears. Ruth was waiting, looking worried. "Anything?" "Nothing. The Johnsons are fine. House is secure. No signs of trouble." We stood there in the records room, the tape still sitting on the machine, daring us to play it again. "There has to be an explanation," Ruth said, though she didn't sound convinced. "Play the rest of the tape. Let's see if there are any other calls like this." Ruth fast-forwarded through the tape. Most of the calls were normal, exactly what you'd expect from September 1989. Then, about an hour of tape later, another call. Ruth's voice. 911. "What's your emergency?" A man's voice, older, labored breathing. "I need an ambulance. Chest pains. Can't breathe right." "What's your address, sir?" 447 Pine Street. "Please hurry." "Standard medical emergency." Ruth was already checking the logbook. "Got it. September 19th, 1989, cardiac call. Mr. Henderson, He survived, made a full recovery, but I was listening to the background again. The same technique that had revealed the news broadcast in the first call. This time, I heard a radio. President Clinton announced today. I looked at Ruth. Her face had gone white. Clinton wasn't president in 1989, she whispered. Bush was. When did Clinton take office? January 1993. The call was from 1989. The radio in the background was broadcasting news from at least 1993, possibly later. Ruth, we need to go through all these tapes, every single one. For the next 3 days, we worked late into the night, listening to old calls, checking backgrounds, looking for anomalies. We found 14 more. 14 calls that contained background sounds from the future. News broadcasts, television shows, songs that wouldn't be released for years. All on tapes that were definitely, provably, from the past. Some of the calls matched incidents we remembered. The cardiac call to Mr. Henderson in 1989 had indeed happened. But others, like the woman at 352 Lakeshore Drive, had no corresponding events. They were calls about emergencies that had never occurred, or hadn't occurred yet. On the fourth night, Ruth and I sat in the records room surrounded by tape boxes and notes. We'd been over it a dozen times, looking for any explanation that didn't involve the impossible. What if, Ruth said carefully, what if these calls are from the future? That's insane. More insane than what we're hearing? Anna, I've worked this system for 15 years. I know every quirk, every glitch. This isn't a technical error. These calls are real. If they're real and they're from the future, then why are they being recorded in the past? Why on our system? I don't know. But Anna, if that woman's call is real, if something is going to happen at 352 Lakeshore Drive, then when? The call said he's in the house now. If it's from the future, when in the future? Next week? Next year? Ruth pulled out the tape and examined it closely. The call came in on September 18th, 1989. What if the future call happens on the same date? You mean September 18th of this year, 1994? It's a theory. I checked the calendar. September 18th, 1994 was in 3 days. Even if you're right, we can't just camp out at the Johnsons' house based on impossible recording. But what if we're wrong? What if something terrible happens and we could have prevented it? I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing that woman's voice, the terror, the gunshots in the background of the call that we'd eventually heard if we listened long enough. Whoever she was, whatever was going to happen to her, she needed help. On September 17th, I drove past the Johnson house 3 times. Everything looked normal. The couple was still there, preparing for their trip to Arizona. No signs of trouble, no suspicious vehicles, nothing out of the ordinary. That night, I told my deputy Marcus I needed him to patrol Lakeshore Drive every hour. Just routine checks, nothing specific. He didn't question it. Good deputies don't. At 2:30 a.m. on September 18th, I was in my office when the call came in. Ruth's voice over the radio, strained and urgent. Anna, you need to get to 352 Lakeshore Drive now. I grabbed my gear and ran for my vehicle, calling Marcus to meet me there. The drive took 12 minutes at top speed, lights flashing, adrenaline pumping. When I arrived, Marcus was already there, weapon drawn, covering the front door. The house was dark except for a light in the upstairs window. What have we got? I asked. Neighbor called it in, heard screaming, saw someone with a flashlight inside. The Johnsons' truck is gone. We approached the house carefully. The front door was unlocked. Inside, I could hear movement upstairs and then, clear as day, a woman's voice screaming, "Please, he's coming up the stairs." Marcus and I took the stairs fast. At the top, we found a man in dark clothes, a ski mask holding a pistol. He spun toward us, and Marcus didn't hesitate. One shot, center mass. The intruder went down. In the master bedroom, we found a woman, early 30s, blonde, terrified. She was on the phone with 911, Ruth on the other end. "Ma'am, the officers are there. You're safe now." I holstered my weapon and approached her slowly. "You're okay." "He can't hurt you. What's your name?" "Sarah Johnson." "You're staying here, house-sitting for the Johnsons?" She nodded, still shaking. "They're my parents. I came up for the weekend while they're away. I heard someone downstairs and locked myself in the bedroom. The intruder was dead. Marcus had made a perfect shot. We later identified him as a drifter with a history of breaking into vacation homes, though we never found out how he'd known the house would be empty. But that's not what kept me up at night. What kept me up was the recording. Because when Ruth and I went back to that tape from 1989, when we listened to the woman's voice calling 911 in terror, it was Sarah's voice, exact match. And when we played it for her, she went pale. "That's me." "That's my voice. But how is that possible? That tape is from before I was born." She was right. Sarah Johnson was born in 1991. The tape was from 1989. "You saved my life," she said. "If you hadn't been ready, if you hadn't known." "We heard your call," I told her. "We heard you call for help." "But I called tonight." September 18th, 1994. "We know, but we heard the call 5 years ago." I don't think she believed me. I'm not sure I believed it myself. But the evidence was there, impossible and undeniable. After that night, I became obsessed with those tapes. Ruth and I listened to every single recording we had going back to when the system was installed in 1982. We found 37 anomalous calls, 37 emergencies that were recorded years before they happened. Some we recognized. Calls we'd responded to, incidents we remembered. But others were still in the future, waiting to happen. And that's when I realized the horrifying truth. Our 911 system wasn't just recording calls. It was receiving them from multiple timelines, multiple futures. Some of those futures had already come to pass. Others were still coming. And if we could hear them, maybe we could prevent them. Or maybe, in trying to prevent them, we'd create new futures, new disasters, new timelines where different people suffered and died. I kept Sarah's call on a separate tape, locked in my desk drawer. Sometimes late at night I'd take it out and listen. Her voice, calling for help from 1994, recorded in 1989. A woman who wasn't born yet when the tape rolled, calling from a future that we'd intercepted and changed. The new digital system was installed in October as planned. The old tapes were supposed to be destroyed, but I couldn't do it. I kept them all, every single one, stored in my garage in labeled boxes. Because 3 weeks after Sarah's incident, I was going through the tapes again and found another anomalous call. A car accident on Highway 11, victim trapped and bleeding out. Background Sounds placed it in 1998, 4 years from now. Ruth found me listening to it, saw the look on my face. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know. If I try to prevent it, will I just create a different disaster? Or is this a fixed point, something that has to happen? Maybe we're supposed to hear these calls. Maybe we're supposed to intervene. Or maybe we're supposed to leave the future alone." But I knew I couldn't. Because somewhere in the future someone was calling 911, begging for help, and I had the power to answer that call before it ever happened. The question was whether I should, and what would happen if I did. I spent 2 weeks agonizing over the 1998 car accident call. Every night I'd listen to it, trying to glean any detail that might help me prevent it. The call was brief, frantic. A young man's voice, maybe early 20s. 911, I need help. There's been an accident on Highway 11, mile marker 34. My girlfriend, she's trapped in the car. There's so much blood, please hurry. Background sounds, rain, heavy, wind, and a song on the car radio, faint but recognizable, a song that wouldn't be released until 1996. Ruth had helped me narrow down the date. Based on the news broadcast we could hear in the far background of the call, it was November 1998, possibly November 15th, based on references to an upcoming election. 4 years away, Ruth said. That's a long time to wait. I'm not going to wait. I'm going to prevent it. How? You don't know who the caller is, who the girlfriend is, what causes the accident. Mile marker 34 on Highway 11. That stretch has always been dangerous. Sharp curve, no guardrail. If we can get the county to install better signage, maybe a guardrail, we could prevent it. Ruth looked skeptical. You're going to convince the county to spend thousands of dollars on a stretch of road based on a call from the future that you can't explain. She had a point, but I had to try. It took me 3 months to get the county commission to even consider it. I presented accident statistics for that stretch of road, emphasized the danger, made a case for public safety. In January 1995, they finally approved funding for new reflective markers and a guardrail at mile marker 34. The work was completed in March 1995. I felt a strange sense of accomplishment, like I'd reached back through time and saved someone I'd never meet. But that feeling didn't last long. In April, I was going through the tapes again when I found a new call. Not new in the sense that it had just been recorded, but new in that it hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. Ruth and I had cataloged every anomalous call. This one wasn't on our list, but here it was, clear as day, on a tape from 1991. 911, what's your emergency? A woman's voice, middle-aged, hysterical. There's been an accident. Highway 11, near mile marker 35. Please send an ambulance. My son, he's not breathing. Mile marker 35, 1 mile from where I'd installed the guardrail. The background sounds placed it in November 1998, the same time frame as the original accident. My hands were shaking as I stopped the tape. Ruth looked at me. That wasn't there before. I know. You saved the girlfriend. But now the son dies. I felt sick. By preventing one accident, had I caused another? Had the same driver, saved from crashing at mile marker 34, simply made it 1 more mile before losing control? Maybe it's not related, Ruth suggested, but neither of us believed it. I spent the next week trying to find any mention of these people in our records. Nothing. No John or Jane Doe matching the voices, no families in the area who fit the profile. They were ghosts, not yet born or not yet moved to our county. Then things started getting strange. I came into the station one morning and noticed something off about my office. The calendar on the wall was different. Not the month or year, but the actual calendar itself. It had been a promotional calendar from the local hardware store, featuring pictures of fishing boats. Now it was from the county tourism board, featuring winter scenes. Ruth, when did we change the calendar in my office? She looked up from her desk. What calendar? The one on my wall. It's different. Anna, that calendar has been there all year. Same one you put up in January. But it wasn't. I was sure of it. I remembered the fishing boats, remembered laughing at the amateur photography. This tourism calendar was completely different. I checked my desk drawer, where I kept Sarah Johnson's tape. It was still there, but the label had changed. Instead of my handwriting, it was typed, and the date was different by 2 days. Small changes. Insignificant, maybe, but they were there. Over the next few months, more anomalies appeared. Books on my shelf that I didn't remember buying. A commendation in my file for an incident I had no memory of. Ruth mentioned her grandson was visiting, but Ruth didn't have a grandson. She'd never had children. But when I questioned it, she looked at me strangely and showed me photos of a boy about 12 years old, her daughter's son. Her daughter who didn't exist. Or had I somehow slipped into a timeline where she did exist? I was losing my grip on what was real. Every intervention, every change I'd made by hearing those future calls was creating ripples, small ones at first, but growing. In August 1995, I heard another future call. This one was from 2001, clear background references to the September 11th attacks. A domestic violence situation gone critical. I had 6 years to find the family and intervene before it turned deadly. But I hesitated, because by then I'd found 3 more calls that hadn't existed before. 3 more emergencies that seemed to be consequences of my interventions. It was like playing chess against an opponent I couldn't see, where every move I made created new threats I hadn't anticipated. Ruth found me one night, sitting in the records room, surrounded by tapes. "You have to stop," she said. "I can't. People are going to die. I have the power to save them. But every time you save one person, someone else dies. Can't you see the pattern? You're not preventing tragedies, you're just redistributing them. So what do I do? Listen to these calls and do nothing? Maybe that's exactly what you're supposed to do." I thought about Sarah Johnson, alive because I'd heard her call. Could I have lived with myself if I'd let her die? But what about the mother's son at mile marker 35? Was his death my fault? I didn't have answers. All I had were the tapes, the calls, and the growing certainty that something fundamental was breaking down. In September, I noticed the newspaper archives at the library had changed. Headlines I remembered reading were different. A fire that had killed 3 people in 1992 now showed 0 casualties. But a car accident I didn't remember had killed 2. The total death count was the same, just redistributed. Ruth's theory was terrifying in its simplicity. Maybe there's a balance. Maybe a certain number of people are supposed to die, and the universe adjusts. You save someone here, it takes someone there. That's insane, is it? Look at what's happening. Every intervention creates a new branch, a new timeline. But the timelines are collapsing back together, trying to maintain equilibrium. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. The evidence was mounting. Reality itself was becoming unstable around me, and I was the catalyst. The breaking point came in October 1995. I heard a call from 2005. A mass casualty incident. A school. The details were vague, but the horror was clear. Multiple victims, children, chaos. I had 10 years to prevent it. 10 years to figure out what would happen and stop it. But I'd also learned something crucial by then. The more I intervened, the more reality fractured. Small changes were accumulating, creating inconsistencies, paradoxes. And then I heard the call that changed everything. It was on a tape from 1990, but the call was from 2010. 20 years in the future. And the voice was mine. 911, what's your emergency? This is Sheriff Anna Carlson. Or I was. I don't know if I still am. You need to stop answering the calls. You need to stop trying to prevent them. Every intervention makes it worse. I'm calling from 2010, but I don't know which 2010. There are dozens of timelines now, all overlapping, all collapsing into each other. You have to stop before it's too late. My own voice, older, desperate, calling from a future I hadn't lived yet. If you're hearing this, if the system is still recording these calls in your time, then it's not too late. Don't answer them. don't intervene. Let the future unfold as it will. The alternative is worse. Trust me." The call ended with static. I played it for Ruth. She was silent for a long time. "It's you," she finally said. "That's definitely your voice. From 2010, from a timeline where I kept intervening. And she says stop." I looked at the stack of tapes, at all the future emergencies I'd cataloged. Car accidents, medical emergencies, crimes, disasters, dozens of people I could potentially save, and my future self was telling me to let them die. What if she's wrong? I asked. What if the reason things are bad in her timeline is because I'm about to stop? What if I need to keep going? Or, Ruth said carefully, what if she's right, and every intervention you make pushes us closer to whatever disaster she's living through? I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Sarah Johnson, alive and safe. About the girlfriend at mile marker 34, saved from the crash. About all the people I could help if I just kept listening, kept intervening. But I also thought about my future self, desperate and broken, calling back through time with a warning. The next morning, I made a decision. I would try one more intervention, the school incident from 2005. If I could prevent that without creating worse consequences, then maybe I could trust myself to keep going. But if my future self was right, if things got worse, then I would stop. I would destroy the tapes, shut down my investigation, and let the future be the future. The call from 2005 had mentioned a name, just once, barely audible in the background. A teacher's name being called out during the chaos. Mrs. Patterson. I had 10 years to find Mrs. Patterson, figure out which school, and prevent whatever was going to happen. 10 years to either save dozens of children or condemn us all to whatever timeline my future self was trying to warn me about. As I locked up the station that night, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door to my office had a new scratch on it. Deep, deliberate, like someone had carved it with a knife. 3 words: stop answering calls. I was alone in the building. The scratch hadn't been there that morning. Someone, or something, was trying to communicate with me across timelines, and they were getting more desperate. The question was whether I'd listen. The scratch on my office door was just the beginning. Over the next few months, the warnings escalated. Messages appeared in places they shouldn't. My personal notebook would have entries I didn't write, in handwriting that was almost but not quite mine, warning me, begging me to stop. But I couldn't stop, not when I had a chance to prevent a school tragedy. I spent the winter of 1996 searching for Mrs. Patterson. There were 3 teachers by that name in Minnesota, but none in Lake of the Woods County. I expanded my search to neighboring counties, then the entire state. By spring, I'd identified 7 possible candidates, each one teaching in a different district, each one a potential target. The problem was I didn't know which school, which grade, what would trigger the incident. The call had been chaotic, overlapping voices, screams, panic. All I had was a name and a date. Sometime in 2005, most likely in the fall based on the background sounds. Ruth had grown increasingly distant. She'd stopped helping me with the tapes after the incident with her daughter. The daughter who shouldn't exist but did, at least in some timelines. Ruth would come to work some mornings and ask me questions about events I had no memory of, while other days she'd deny things I clearly remembered us doing together. I don't know what's real anymore, she told me one afternoon in March 1996. We were in the break room, coffee growing cold between us. Yesterday I went to my daughter's house for dinner. I met my grandchildren. I held my grandson, and he was so real, Anna. I could feel his weight, smell his baby shampoo. But when I got home and looked at the photos I'd taken, the camera was empty. No film had been loaded. Maybe you forgot to load it. I've been using that camera for 20 years. I don't forget. She looked at me with hollow eyes. Or maybe I did forget. Maybe I never went to dinner. Maybe I don't have a daughter. But the memories are so vivid. How do I know which memories are real? I didn't have an answer for her. Because I was experiencing the same thing. My apartment had furniture I didn't remember buying, a bookshelf full of novels I'd supposedly read but had no memory of, a scar on my left hand from a kitchen accident that I both remembered and didn't remember happening. By summer, Ruth had started keeping detailed journals, writing down everything that happened each day, documenting the changes. She showed me entries that would rewrite themselves, entire paragraphs shifting, events changing, her handwriting transforming into something slightly different. "Look at this," she said one morning in July, opening her journal to a page dated 2 weeks earlier. I wrote that I had lunch with my sister. But my sister died in 1982. I was at her funeral. But now I also remember her alive, living in Duluth, working as a librarian. Both memories are equally real in my head. "Ruth, maybe you should see someone, a doctor or a psychiatrist. You think I'm crazy?" Her laugh was bitter. Maybe I am. Maybe we both are. Or maybe reality itself is crazy, and we're the only ones sane enough to see it. The reality fluctuations intensified through the fall. My deputy, Marcus Chen, started asking questions I couldn't answer. He'd mentioned cases we'd supposedly worked together that I had no memory of. Or he'd bring up people I'd never heard of, confused when I didn't recognize the names. "Sheriff, are you feeling okay?" he asked me one October afternoon. "You've been different lately. Distracted. Like you're not all here." "I'm fine, Marcus. Just working on something." "Is it about those old tapes?" "Ruth mentioned you've been going through the archives a lot." I tensed. Did she say anything else? "Just that you're looking for patterns in old emergency calls." "Some kind of research project." He paused. "Sheriff, if something's wrong, if you need help with a case, you can tell me." But I couldn't tell him. How do you explain that you're receiving 9/11 calls from the future? That every intervention you make creates alternate timelines that are collapsing back on themselves, fracturing reality. "I appreciate that, Marcus. Really. But this is something I need to handle alone." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded and left. Good deputies know when not to push. That night, I had my first extended conversation with an alternate version of myself. I was in the records room, listening to a call from 2003 when I felt a presence. Not sudden, but gradual, like someone slowly materializing. I turned and saw her sitting in the chair across from me. She was me, but older, maybe mid-50s, wearing a sheriff's uniform I didn't recognize. The badge was the same, but the insignia on the shoulder patches was different. From a timeline where the department had different leadership, different budgets, different history. "You're still trying to save them," she said. Her voice was tired, worn down by years I hadn't lived. My hand went instinctively to my service weapon, but I didn't draw it. "Who are you?" "Anna Carlson, sheriff of Lake of the Woods County. Or I was before everything collapsed." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. In my timeline, I kept intervening. Every call I heard, every tragedy I could prevent, I tried. By 2010, there were so many overlapping timelines that coherent reality ceased to exist in this county. "What do you mean, ceased to exist?" "I mean, buildings would appear and disappear based on which timeline was dominant at any given moment. The school would be there in the morning, gone by afternoon, back again by evening. People would exist in 3 or 4 versions simultaneously. I'd arrest someone for a crime, and by the time I got them to the station, nobody remembered the crime ever happening. Or it had happened, but to someone else. She pulled out a photograph and placed it on the table between us. It showed Main Street in Baudette, but the image was fractured, overlapping. Multiple versions of the same buildings occupying the same space, like a triple exposed photograph. This is what happens when too many timelines try to exist simultaneously. Reality becomes a probability wave that never collapses. Everything and nothing is true at the same time. How did you get here? How are you in my timeline? Because timelines are converging. All the versions of Anna Carlson making different choices, creating different branches. We're being drawn back together toward nexus points, decision moments where everything hinges on a single choice. She tapped the tape recorder. The school incident. That's the biggest nexus point, the moment where the most branches diverge. I have to prevent it. I can't just let children die. I saved them. Most of them. 18 survived in my timeline. But do you know what the cost was? Her voice cracked. Reality itself fractured so badly that by 2008, the federal government declared this entire region a disaster zone. Not a natural disaster, not a chemical spill, reality failure. They evacuated 17,000 people, built a wall around the affected area. The last thing I remember before I found myself here was standing in this very room, watching it dissolve around me. The walls flickering between different decades, different versions of the station, until everything just stopped making sense. I felt cold, but the children survived. In my timeline, yes. But do you know what happened in the neighboring county? The timeline fractures spread. Random people started disappearing, their entire existence erased because they only existed in timelines that got pruned. Families woke up not remembering children they'd raised for years. People showed up who'd died decades ago in other timelines. The total death count across all the chaos that followed. Over 200 people, Anna. 200 deaths because I couldn't let 18 children die. How do you know that's what caused it? Maybe. I know because I can see them now. All the timelines, all at once. She looked at me, and I saw something terrifying in her eyes. A depth that shouldn't exist, like she was looking at me from 1,000 different angles simultaneously. That's what happens when you fragment too far. You become unstuck from singular reality. I exist in all the branches at once now, seeing every version of every choice. It's a kind of hell you can't imagine. Before I could respond, she started to fade. Not like walking away, but like a dissolving image, breaking apart into probability. "Don't make my mistake," she said, her voice echoing from somewhere that wasn't quite here. "The school. Don't try to stop it. The cost is too high." Then she was gone, and I was alone in the records room with only the hum of the tape recorder for company. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about her eyes, the way she'd looked at me from multiple directions at once. Was that my future? To become so fractured across timelines that I'd lose singular existence entirely? The next morning, things got worse. I arrived at the station to find the building was different. Not dramatically, but subtly. The paint on the exterior was a shade lighter. The sign out front had different font. Inside, the layout was identical, but small details had changed. Photos on the walls showed events I didn't recognize. A commendation plaque for heroism during a 1993 flood that I had no memory of. Ruth was at her desk, but when she looked up at me, confusion crossed her face. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Ruth, it's me." Anna. She squinted. Anna Carlson? You look different. Did you change your hair? No, Ruth, are you okay? I'm fine. Just, you look younger than I remember. And you're wearing the old uniform style. Did they change the dress code? I looked down at my uniform. It was the same one I'd put on that morning. But Ruth was wearing a different style, more modern, with updated insignia. What year is this? I asked. What kind of question is that? It's 1997, March 12th. Are you feeling all right, Sheriff? I'd gone to bed in February 1996. Somehow, between leaving the station yesterday and arriving this morning, I'd jumped forward over a year. Or the timeline had shifted, and only I remembered the missing time. I excused myself and went to my office. On my desk was a calendar showing March 1997. My appointment book had entries in my handwriting for dates I hadn't lived through. According to the notes, I'd been investigating a missing person case in January, attended a law enforcement conference in February, and conducted a routine equipment audit last week, none of which I remembered doing. I called home. My answering machine picked up. My voice, leaving a standard message. But something was wrong about the voice. It was me, but not quite. The inflection was slightly off, the phrasing different. I drove home in a daze. The apartment building looked the same from the outside, but when I unlocked my door, the interior was different. Same layout, but different furniture. Different colors. Photos on the wall showed me at events I'd never attended. A vacation to Montana I'd never taken. A law enforcement award ceremony I'd never been to. In the bedroom, I found a diary on my nightstand. My handwriting, documenting the last year of my life. A year I hadn't lived. A year that belonged to a different version of me. I sat on the bed and read through it. This Anna had apparently lived a relatively normal year. No reality investigations, no timeline paradoxes. She'd worked cases, maintained the station, lived an ordinary life. The diary made no mention of the tapes, the anomalous calls, or any of the reality fractures. But I remembered all of it. I was the other Anna, the one who'd kept investigating. And somehow I'd been inserted into a timeline where I hadn't. Or had I? Maybe I was the normal one, and the memories of investigating were false, implanted by timeline bleed-through. I couldn't tell anymore. Over the next few weeks, I experienced more shifts. Some days, I'd wake up in March 1997. Other days, I'd find myself back in 1996, experiencing time that had supposedly already passed. The timeline was looping, fracturing, trying to reconcile different versions of events. Ruth seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Some days, she remembered her daughter. Other days, she didn't. Some days, she recognized me. Other days, she looked at me like I was a stranger wearing a familiar face. Marcus started avoiding me. I'd catch him watching me with concerned eyes like he knew something was wrong but couldn't articulate what. The town itself was changing. Buildings would shift between different states of repair. The gas station on Main Street would be new one day, decades old the next. The Johnsons' house, where Sarah had almost died, would sometimes not exist at all, just an empty lot where a house should be. And I started seeing them more frequently. The other Annas. One version appeared in my patrol car while I was driving. Sitting in the passenger seat, older, wearing civilian clothes. "You're experiencing timeline drift," she said calmly, like this was a normal conversation. "You've fractured so far that you're slipping between branches. Soon you won't be anchored to any single timeline. How do I stop it? You can't. Not anymore. The only question now is whether you let it spread or whether you make a choice that collapses the branches. The school incident. Yes, that's the nexus. That's where all the Annas converge. Every version of you who's ever heard that call, we're all being drawn toward that moment. And whatever choice gets made will determine which timeline becomes dominant. She faded before I could ask more questions. In June 1997, or maybe it was still March, time had become unreliable. I walked into the station and found 5 versions of myself waiting. Different ages, different timelines, all sitting in the break room. The youngest looked maybe 30, fresh-faced, her uniform crisp and new. The oldest was in her 70s, hair white, face lined with decades of hard choices. Ruth sat at her desk in the main office, but she was flickering, existing in multiple states, different ages, there and not there simultaneously. "We're here because this is the decision point," the oldest version said. Her voice was the one I'd heard on the phone, calling from 2010. "Right here, right now. Before you identify which school Mrs. Patterson teaches at. Before you can intervene in the 2005 incident. This is where all of us chose. Chose what? To keep going or to stop? To save the children or to save reality?" She gestured to the others. "Every version of you across every branch is facing this choice right now, and whatever you decide will determine which timeline becomes the primary reality." A version close to my current age stood up. "I chose to intervene. In my timeline, I saved 18 of the children. 5 died anyway. But by 2006, reality had fractured so badly that the county became uninhabitable. Not physically, but probabilistically. People couldn't maintain coherent existence. The federal government cordoned off the area. I'm told it's still quarantined, a zone where reality doesn't work properly." Another version, younger, spoke up. "I chose to walk away. Destroyed the tapes, quit my job, tried to forget. In my timeline, the incident happened. 23 children and Mrs. Patterson died. The shooter killed himself. It was the worst thing this county had ever seen. I've lived with that guilt for 15 years now." A fourth version, somewhere between the others in age, leaned forward. I tried to find a middle path. Improved security, increased patrols, but didn't directly intervene based on the call. In my timeline, the incident still happened, but the death toll was lower. 11 children died. But the intervention still created enough timeline branches that reality started to fray. Not as bad as total collapse, but bad enough that people noticed. Strange occurrences, unexplained phenomena. The town got a reputation for being haunted. They were all looking at me now, all these versions of myself, waiting for me to speak. "What if none of those are the right choice?" I asked. "What if there's another way?" The oldest version smiled sadly. "We've all thought that. Every version of Anna Carlson thinks she can find the option nobody else saw, the clever solution that saves everyone and preserves reality. But there isn't one. The laws of causality don't allow it. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Every life saved is a life lost somewhere else. Every timeline you create is another fracture in the fabric of reality. So, what do I do? You choose which price you're willing to pay. The lives of children you can count, or the stability of reality you can't measure. Guilt you can feel, or chaos you can't predict." The room started to flicker. The walls shifted between different paint colors, different decades. Through the windows I could see multiple versions of Main Street overlapping, buildings from different eras occupying the same space. "It's happening faster now," one of the middle-aged versions said. "The convergence. All the timelines are collapsing toward the nexus point. Soon there won't be multiple branches, just one reality, determined by one choice." "Whose choice?" I asked. They all smiled at the same time, a disturbing synchronization. Yours, mine, ours, we're all the same person, Anna. Whatever choice you make here in this timeline ripples across all the others. That's why we're all here. Because this is the moment where Anna Carlson decides who she really is. The youngest version stood. I haven't lived this yet. In my timeline, it's still 1994. But I'm here because the convergence is pulling me forward, showing me my future, showing me the choice I'll have to make. She looked at me with eyes too haunted for someone so young. I'm you at the beginning, before the reality fractures got bad, and I'm terrified of becoming any of you. The versions started to fade, one by one. The oldest lingered longest. You have until 2005, she said. 8 years to live with the knowledge of what's coming. 8 years to decide which version of yourself you can live with being. Choose wisely, Anna. Or choose poorly. But choose, because indecision is its own kind of hell. Then I was alone in the break room. Ruth walked in, solid and singular, looking at me with concern. Anna, you've been standing there for 10 minutes. Are you okay? How long have I been here? At the station? You arrived an hour ago. You went straight to the break room and just stood there, staring at the wall. I was starting to worry. What year is it, Ruth? She touched my forehead. You're burning up. You should go home, get some rest. Ruth, please. What year? It's 1997, October. Anna, you're scaring me. October 1997. I'd lost months again, or gained them, or experienced them in another timeline. I couldn't tell. I went home and found my apartment had stabilized. Same furniture, same photos. The diary on my nightstand was gone. I checked the calendar. October 17th, 1997. 8 years until the incident. 8 years to live with impossible knowledge, in a reality that was slowly tearing itself apart because of my interventions. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the list of Mrs. Pattersons I'd compiled. 7 names, 7 schools. One of them would be at the center of a tragedy that would kill 23 children and destroy a woman's life. But if I intervened, I'd create a cascade of timeline fractures that would destroy reality itself for thousands of people. I stared at that list for hours, trying to decide what to do. Save the children, or save reality. Guilt I could measure, or chaos I couldn't predict. And all I kept thinking was, what if the other Annas were wrong? What if there was another way? What if I could find the solution that saved everyone? But deep down, I knew that was hubris. That's what every version of me had thought. And every version had failed in a different way. The next morning, I made a decision. I would find Mrs. Patterson. I would learn everything I could about the school, the students, the situation. I would prepare for every possibility. And when 2005 came, when I had to make the final choice, I would be ready. Or at least, I would know with certainty that I'd tried everything. Even if that certainty cost me my sanity, my existence, or reality itself. I was Sheriff Anna Carlson, and I was about to spend 8 years preparing for the worst decision of my life. I wish I could tell you that over those 8 years, from 1997 to 2005, I found clarity, that I made peace with whatever decision I would eventually have to make. But the truth is, those years were a descent into obsession and madness, marked by increasingly desperate attempts to find a solution that didn't exist. By the end of 1997, I'd narrowed down my list to 3 Mrs. Pattersons. Margaret Patterson, 4th grade teacher who would start at Bodette Elementary in 2003. Patricia Patterson, middle school teacher in Roseau. and Melissa Patterson, who didn't exist yet but whose hiring announcement I'd found on a tape from 2004. I focused on Margaret. Something about the timeline fit better. The age of the children's voices in the background of the call. The layout of the classroom I could barely make out from the chaos of the recording. I became a fixture at Bodette Elementary long before she ever set foot there. I volunteered for safety presentations, helped with active shooter drills that were just becoming standard after Columbine. I built relationships with the principal, the staff, the other teachers. They thought I was just a dedicated public servant, taking community outreach seriously. They didn't know I was preparing for a tragedy that hadn't happened yet. Ruth retired in 2001. The timeline fluctuations had taken their toll on her. She'd aged rapidly over those 4 years, worn down by the constant uncertainty of which memories were real. Her daughter, the one who did and didn't exist, was getting married. Ruth invited me to the wedding. I went. I met the daughter, whose name was Caroline. I met Caroline's fiancé, a nice man named David who worked in insurance. I danced at the reception, ate cake, gave a toast. It was all perfectly real, but when I got home and looked at the photos I'd taken, half of them showed different people. In some photos, Caroline was blonde. In others, brunette. In one shot, she didn't exist at all, just an empty space where she should have been standing, with Ruth's arm around nothing. I don't know if she's real, Ruth told me a few days later. We were having coffee at her house, one of the last times we'd really talk. I love her. I have memories of raising her. But I also remember being childless. Both are true. Both are false. How do you live like that, Anna? I don't know. Yes, you do. You've been living like that for years now. How do you stand it? I didn't have an answer, because the truth was, I wasn't standing it well. I'd stopped sleeping more than 3 or 4 hours a night. I'd see things, glimpses of other timelines bleeding through. I'd turn a corner and see the street from a different decade. I'd talk to people who remembered events differently than I did, and I could never be sure which of us was right. Ruth moved to Arizona in early 2002. Before she left, she gave me something. A box full of her journals, years of documentation about the changes we'd witnessed. I don't want to remember anymore, she said. Maybe in Arizona, away from here, away from whatever's happening, I can just have one set of memories. Just one life. Even if it's not the real one. Ruth, I'm sorry. For everything. For starting this. She looked at me for a long moment. You saved Sarah Johnson. She's alive because of you. That has to count for something. What if she only exists in this timeline? What if in others she never existed at all? Then at least in this timeline, her parents got to keep their daughter. That's not nothing, Anna. After she left, I felt more alone than ever. Marcus was still my deputy, but he'd grown distant. He knew something was wrong with me, even if he couldn't articulate what. The way I'd sometimes pause mid-sentence like I was listening to something he couldn't hear. The way I'd react to things that hadn't happened yet, or hadn't happened in this timeline. In 2003, Margaret Patterson started teaching at Bodette Elementary, 4th grade, room 107, exactly where the call had come from. I engineered meetings with her, casual conversations after school board meetings or at community events. She was in her early 30s, passionate about teaching, loved by her students. I could see why children would trust her, would feel safe in her classroom. I also saw the vulnerability. She'd moved to Bodette after a difficult divorce, looking for a fresh start. She lived alone, kept to herself outside of school. The kind of person who might not be missed right away if something happened. The kind of person a predator might target. I ran background checks on everyone in her life. Everyone who came into contact with the school. I looked for warning signs, red flags, anything that might indicate who would eventually come for those children, but I found nothing. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives, none of them showing any indication of future violence. By 2004, the reality fluctuations had gotten worse. I'd experienced the same day multiple times, with different outcomes. I'd arrest someone for a crime, and the next morning they'd be free, with no record of the arrest. Cases I'd worked on would disappear from the files, or appear completed with reports I'd never written. The other deputies started to notice. I'd overhear them talking about me when they thought I couldn't hear. About how Sheriff Carlson was losing it. How maybe she should retire. How someone should talk to her about the way she'd sometimes respond to calls that hadn't come in, or reference cases that didn't exist. Marcus finally confronted me in March 2004, a full year before the incident. "Sheriff, we need to talk." I was in my office, surrounded by files and notes about the school, about Margaret Patterson, about every possible angle of the coming tragedy. "Not now, Marcus." "I'm busy. You're always busy. With something you won't explain, something that's eating you alive." He closed the door and sat down across from me. "I've known you for almost 10 years now. You're the best sheriff this county's ever had. But something's wrong and it's getting worse. Please, let me help. You can't help with this. Try me." I looked at him, this good man who'd served loyally beside me, who deserved better than a sheriff who was half lost in timeline fractures. And I almost told him, almost explained about the tapes, the calls from the future, the impossible choice I was going to have to make. But I couldn't. Because how do you explain that you're receiving 9/11 calls from multiple timelines? That every decision you make creates branches in reality? That you're becoming unstuck from singular existence? "Marcus, I appreciate your concern, really, but this is something I need to handle alone." He stood up, disappointment clear on his face. "You know where to find me when you realize you don't have to carry everything by yourself." After he left, I pulled out the tape, the call from 2005. I'd listened to it so many times I'd memorized every scream, every plea, every gunshot. 23 children, Mrs. Patterson's voice begging for help. I had 1 year left to decide what to do. In September 2004, 6 months before the incident, I had another visit from a future version of myself. This one was from 2015, 10 years after the nexus point. She appeared in my bedroom at 3 in the morning. I woke to find her sitting in the chair by the window, looking out at the street. "In my timeline," she said, without turning to look at me, "you intervened. Saved most of the children. Reality fractured, just like the others warned you. But something else happened too. Something none of the other versions mentioned." "What?" "The survivors remembered. The children you saved, they grew up knowing they'd been saved from a timeline where they died. Some of them could see the fractures, see the other realities bleeding through. It drove 3 of them insane. 2 committed suicide before they turned 20. The others lived with trauma that no therapy could touch, because how do you heal from knowing you exist in a timeline you shouldn't?" She finally turned to look at me. She was older than me by a decade, but she looked ancient. The weight of that knowledge, of having saved them only to condemn them to that kind of awareness, it's worse than if I'd let them die. At least death is final. What I gave them was existence haunted by non-existence. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to know all the costs. Not just the timeline fractures, not just the reality collapse, but what you do to the survivors. The burden you place on them just by saving them. So what's the answer? What's the right choice?" She smiled sadly. "There is no right choice, Anna. There's just the choice you can live with. And 10 years from now, Whichever choice you make, you'll be sitting where I am, wondering if you chose wrong." She faded, and I was alone in the dark. The winter of 2004 to 2005 was the longest of my life. Every day brought me closer to April 17th. Every day, I'd wake up and wonder if I'd made my decision yet, if somewhere in some timeline, a version of me had already chosen. In February, I had my final conversation with all the other Annas. I was driving to work when they appeared, all of them sitting in my patrol car. The seats were suddenly filled with different versions of myself, different ages, different outcomes. The youngest spoke first. "We're converging. All the timelines, all the choices, they're collapsing toward the nexus point. Soon, there will only be one Anna, one choice, one reality." The oldest added, "What you decide in the next 2 months will echo across all the timelines. Every version of you will feel it. Every branch will either solidify or dissolve." I pulled over, unable to drive with them all there, their presence making the car feel impossibly crowded and utterly empty at the same time. "Tell me how to choose," I begged them. "Tell me which choice is right." They looked at each other, these versions of myself, and I saw the same desperate uncertainty in all their eyes. "We can't," one of them said, "because none of us know. We each made our choice, lived with the consequences, and still don't know if it was right. The ones who saved the children live with the guilt of reality collapse. The ones who didn't live with the guilt of dead children. The ones who tried the middle path failed anyway. So I'm condemned no matter what." "No. You're human. And being human means sometimes there are no good choices. Only choices you can survive making." They faded one by one, until I was alone in my patrol car on a February morning, 2 months away from the worst day of my life. I identified the shooter in March. Not the person, I never figured out who it would be, but I identified the pattern. The call, when I listened for the 1,000th time, had background sounds that told me it would happen during second period on a Monday. The morning announcements I could barely hear placed it in April. I narrowed it down to 3 possible Mondays: April 4th, 11th, or 18th. April 17th felt right. Something about the date resonated with all my timeline experiences. It was exactly 10 years after I'd saved Sarah Johnson in 1995. 10 years after I'd learned that the 911 system received calls from the future. A decade of consequences, culminating in a single decision. I took a leave of absence starting April 15th. Told Marcus I needed a few days for personal reasons. He didn't argue, probably relieved that I'd finally agreed to step away. But I didn't go home. I stayed close to the school. On Sunday, April 16th, the night before, I parked across from Bodette Elementary and sat there all night. I watched the building in the darkness, thinking about the children inside who would arrive tomorrow morning. 23 of them would be in Mrs. Patterson's 4th grade class. I thought about Sarah Johnson, alive and safe, probably sleeping in her apartment somewhere, unaware that she only existed because I'd heard her call for help from before she was born. I thought about Ruth, in Arizona, trying to live with one set of memories, one coherent life. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd encountered, each one broken in a different way by the choice they'd made. And I thought about what Sheriff Anna Carlson really meant. Was I the person who saved lives at any cost? Or was I the person who accepted that some tragedies couldn't be prevented without causing worse ones? My phone rang at 3 a.m. The caller ID showed my own number calling from the station phone. I knew who it would be before I answered. Anna. My voice, older, exhausted, calling from 2010. "It's time. You're at the decision point right now, sitting outside the school. I know because I remember being you, making this choice. Tell me what to do. I can't, because whatever I tell you will just be my choice, not yours. But I can tell you this. In my timeline, I intervened. I saved 15 children. 8 died anyway, and the intervention created timeline branches that spread far beyond this county. By 2008, 3 states were experiencing reality fluctuations. People forgetting their own children, spouses who'd never existed appearing in their homes, entire towns phasing in and out of existence. And if I don't intervene, then 23 children die. Mrs. Patterson lives with survivor's guilt for the rest of her life. But reality stabilizes. The timeline fractures stop spreading. The cost is measurable, contained, final. How can I make that choice? How can I just let them die? Her voice was gentle, sad. Because you're a sheriff, and sometimes sheriffs have to make impossible choices. You protect the many by sacrificing the few. It's the worst part of the job, and it never gets easier. But it's what we signed up for. I hate this. I know. I hate it too. Every version of Anna who's lived through this hates it, but hating it doesn't change the necessity of choosing. The call disconnected. The sky was starting to lighten in the east. Dawn was coming. The children would start arriving at school in 5 hours. At 6 a.m., I saw him, a man I didn't recognize walking up to the school entrance. He was carrying a backpack that sat wrong on his shoulders, too heavy, too bulky. Everything about his body language screamed intent. He was early. He was scouting. This was reconnaissance for the attack that would come later. I reached for my door handle. All I had to do was step out, walk over there, confront him. One intervention, one arrest, and I could prevent the whole thing. Then, I saw her, standing between me and the school. My future self from 2010, the one I'd just spoken to. She shook her head slowly, pleading with me through the windshield. Behind her, more versions of me appeared. Some were nodding, encouraging me to intervene. Others were shaking their heads, begging me to stop. Different choices from different timelines, all converging on this moment. The man finished his reconnaissance and walked away. I watched him leave, my hand still on the door handle, paralyzed by the weight of all the possible futures. At 8 a.m., children started arriving. I watched them walk into the school, backpacks bouncing, laughing with friends, completely unaware of the danger coming. Mrs. Patterson stood at the entrance, greeting them with smiles. At 9:45 a.m. during second period, the man returned. This time his backpack was even heavier. This time he walked with purpose, not hesitation. This time he was here to kill. I watched him approach the entrance. I watched him reach for the door. I watched him disappear inside the building. And I did nothing. The hardest thing I've ever done was sitting in that car, watching, as he entered the school. Every instinct I had screamed at me to move, to act, to save those children, but I forced myself to stay still. At 9:52 a.m., I heard the first gunshot. I radioed for backup, for ambulances, calling in the shooting I'd known about for years but had let happen anyway. Marcus responded immediately, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Sheriff, are you on scene? I'm outside. Don't enter until backup arrives. We need to secure the perimeter. It was the coward's choice." Using protocol as an excuse for inaction. But I couldn't risk entering. Couldn't risk changing the outcome now that I'd made my decision to let it happen. More gunshots. Screaming. The sounds of hell echoing from inside that school. It took 7 minutes for additional units to arrive. 7 minutes that felt like 7 hours. 7 minutes in which I sat in my car, listening to children die, knowing I could have prevented it. When Marcus arrived, we entered together. Standard active shooter protocol. Clearing rooms, following the sound of chaos. We found him in room 107, Mrs. Patterson's classroom. He was dead, taken down by Mr. Roberts, the PE teacher who'd charged him despite being unarmed. 8 children were dead. 15 were wounded, some critically. Not 23. Not the number from the call. I'd changed it anyway just by being there, by having influenced the school's protocols over the years. My preparation had saved some of them, even though I hadn't directly intervened. But 8 children were still dead. Mrs. Patterson was alive, covered in blood that wasn't hers, clutching a sobbing girl who'd watched her best friend die. I looked around that classroom, at the overturned desks, the broken windows, the blood on the floor, and I felt something inside me break. I resigned the next day. Couldn't face the families, couldn't explain why I'd been right outside the school when it happened and hadn't stopped it sooner. The official investigation cleared me, said I'd followed protocol, done everything by the book. But I knew the truth. I'd let it happen. I'd had years to prevent it, knowledge nobody else possessed, and I'd chosen to let those 8 children die. The timeline fluctuations stopped almost immediately. The reality fractures, the overlapping versions, the constant uncertainty about which memories were real, all of it faded within days. Reality stabilized because I'd made my choice. I'd picked a timeline and committed to it, and all the other branches had collapsed back into this one. The cost was 8 children's lives and my soul. I moved away from Bodette a month later. Couldn't stay in a place where I'd failed so completely, but I kept the tapes, all of them, stored in a unit in Minneapolis where nobody would ever find them. For years, I'd check on them occasionally. The anomalous calls had stopped after April 17, 2005. No more messages from the future. No more warnings from alternate versions of myself. It was like the universe had decided I'd made my choice, and that was the end of it. I tried to build a new life. Moved to a small town in northern Wisconsin, got a job as a dispatcher. Nothing glamorous, nothing that required making life or death decisions. Just taking calls, sending help, letting others make the hard choices. I thought about the case constantly. Thought about those 8 children, about the 15 I'd inadvertently saved, about the timelines that no longer existed because of my choice. I thought about Ruth, who called me once from Arizona. She sounded more at peace than I'd heard her in years. "I only have one set of memories now," she told me. "I don't know if my daughter is real, but she feels real, and that's enough. Whatever you did, Anna, whatever choice you made, it worked. Reality is solid again." I didn't tell her the cost. I turned 73 last month. It's 2023 now. 18 years since that April morning. 18 years of living with the choice I made, of wondering if it was right. Most days, I think I did the right thing. Reality is stable. No timeline fractures, no reality collapses, no quantum probability zones where causality breaks down. The federal government didn't have to evacuate an entire region. Thousands of people didn't lose their grip on coherent existence. But then I think about those 8 children. I look up their names sometimes, read about their lives cut short. Emma Rodriguez, who wanted to be a veterinarian. Jacob Chen, who loved dinosaurs. Sarah White, who played piano. 8 futures that never happened because I chose the greater good over individual lives. Was it worth it? I still don't know. Last month, I went back to Minneapolis to check on the storage unit. I needed to see the tapes again, needed to verify that it had all been real and not some elaborate delusion. The tapes were there, dusty and aged, but intact. I started going through them, checking dates, listening to old calls. Most were exactly as I remembered them. But there was one new tape. Not new in the sense of recently recorded, but new in that I'd never seen it before. The label was in my handwriting, but I didn't remember writing it. April 2025. I almost didn't play it. Almost walked away and left it as a mystery. But I couldn't help myself. After 18 years, I needed to know if the timeline had truly stabilized or if the fractures were starting again. I threaded the tape onto an old player I'd kept and pressed play. Static at first, then the familiar beep of a 911 call beginning. Ruth's voice, but wrong somehow. Younger than she should be in 2025, or older, I couldn't tell. 911, what's your emergency? Then a voice I recognized. My voice. But I hadn't made a 911 call. I'd been on the other side, answering them, for my entire career. This is Sheriff Anna Carlson, or I was. I need to know. Did I make the right choice? In my timeline, I saved the children, all 23 of them. And everything fell apart, just like they warned. But I'm calling from a timeline that shouldn't exist, that got pruned when you made your choice. Except it didn't get completely erased. Some of us are still here, trapped in probability space, existing in the branches that were supposed to collapse. My heart stopped. The children you saved, are they alive? Yes, but they're like me now. Existing in a timeline that's not fully real. They're adults now, or they would be if this timeline was solid. But we're all just echoes, probability ghosts, living in a branch that should have been pruned when you let us die in your timeline. I don't understand. If I let you die, how are you calling me? Because timelines don't disappear, Anna. They just become less probable. We still exist, but we're not the main branch anymore, and we're aware of it. We know we're living in the timeline that didn't get chosen. Do you have any idea what that's like? To exist, but know you're not supposed to. To be alive, but be told your life isn't real because someone chose a different probability. The call continued for another minute, but I couldn't process the words. Because if this was true, if the timelines I'd pruned still existed in some quantum state, then I hadn't actually prevented anything. I'd just chosen which version would be considered real. The 8 children who died in my timeline were dead, but in another branch they were alive. And the 23 who died in other timelines were also alive somewhere, in probability space, existing as quantum ghosts in branches that didn't get chosen. I'd been choosing between realities, not between outcomes. The call ended with my other self saying, I don't know if this message will reach you. I don't even know if you're real anymore, or if you're just another probability ghost like me. But if you're listening, if you made the choice to let us die, I need you to know, we're still here, living in the timeline you rejected, and we'll be here forever, knowing we're the ones who weren't chosen. The tape ended. I sat there in the storage unit for hours, trying to process what I'd heard. If it was real, if those other timelines still existed in some form, then my choice hadn't prevented tragedy. It had just determined which tragedy would be considered real and which would be relegated to probability space. I'd let 8 children die in this timeline, but in doing so, I'd made this timeline the real one, the solid one, the one where reality held together. In other timelines, other versions of me had saved those children. But those timelines became probability ghosts, less real, less solid, existing in quantum superposition. Was that better or worse? I don't know. All I know is that I'm 73 years old, living in a timeline I chose 18 years ago, and I still don't know if it was the right choice. Maybe there is no right choice. Maybe all we can do is choose and live with the consequences and hope that somewhere in the infinite branches of probability, some version of us made the choice we wish we'd made. I am Sheriff Anna Carlson. Or I was. I'm not sure which version of that statement is true anymore. But I made my choice. I let 8 children die to save reality, and I have to live with that. Even if, somewhere in probability space, other versions of me made different choices. Even if those versions are still out there, living in timelines I rejected, wondering if they made the right choice too. Even if the line between chosen and unchosen timelines is so thin that sometimes, late at night, I can hear them calling across the branches, asking the same questions I'm asking. Did I make the right choice? Is anyone's timeline truly real, or are we all just probability ghosts living in branches that might collapse at any moment? And if another call comes from the future, from a timeline I didn't choose, will I answer it? I don't know. All I know is that I'm here in this timeline, living with this choice. And somewhere in a storage unit in Minneapolis, there's a tape with a call from 2025. A call I haven't lived yet. A call that might tell me if I was right, or if I doomed us all to live as probability ghosts, forever uncertain which timeline is real. I guess I'll find out in 2 years. If I'm still here, if this timeline is still solid, if reality holds together long enough for me to hear what my future self has to say. Until then, all I can do is wait, and wonder, and live with the choice I made.